The microcrystal clear is set, which means it is time for us to combine the pieces. As you can see, the microcrystal clear is set to a wonderful clear finish, which means that now we can go ahead and mount in our LED pieces. We're going to do this quite simply. One of these will just sit in here, and it's important to note that because of the way these bend, because even with the gum tape in, it still has a bit of a, it's not a perfect 90 degrees, it has a slight taper to it. It's important that because the bottom piece sits above it, we want to make sure that we put it in such a way that it's not going to send all of the light to the top, but it will hit more in the middle. So it's important that we put it this way around and not that way around. With the LED in place, we're going to take a 3x2 section of this copper boarding and we'll use that as our junction. It'll sit just about there. We'll have the power from the nacelles coming in on one side and the power going out to the rest of the Voyager on the other. Okay, now we have our tiny fragments of boards. We need to determine how long these wires need to actually be, which is quite simple. We want it to be about halfway between the two, and we'll give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room with the wire, so I'll bend it upward like that. We'll try and make the junction in the middle here, so I'm going to crop these wires down right about there. The next step in the process is to determine how long the wires from the nacelle need to be, bearing in mind our flashing lights do not need to change at all. So we're just going to dry fit the wires in place like so. Make sure that they go through the channel that we cut for them. Then, so it looks like if I cut them to here, then that will be more than long enough. Separate out my strobes. And then all we're going to do is reattach these lengths that we cut off to the junction, and they'll be our feed through to the main body. Naturally, these need to fit inside quite a tight space, so I'm just going to go ahead and file down the top of the circuit board just a little bit. To target the wires, all I'm going to do is bring my 12 volt up to about where they're going to join and bring it into the circuit so that they're kept as a cluster instead of being stray wires. And then the same deal again, just further down. Okay, with that all done, our next step is to mount the LED inside the actual strut. First off, we just need to test to make sure that everything is working nicely, as once it's in place, it's a bit hard to change it. Very nice. Oh, no, we have a problem. Alright, and that's precisely why you check these things before you proceed forward to a permanent stage of attachment. I just need to tidy up this wire and then we can mount. Alright, the mounting is easy enough. We're going to use the PVA glue, slot that into there with some PVA in it, and then we'll use some masking tape to hold that down until the glue is set. Once it's in place, we'll then adjust all the wiring, clamp our top piece of shell down on top of it, and then mount it onto the nacelle. Then I'm just going to use this cocktail stick to apply it to the underside. A little bit first, and then once I've got a bit of surface area, I'm just going to try and splodge it out a bit. Then I shall get just a little blob into the center just to ensure that there's enough there for it to actually grab onto the plastic. Then we just flip it over, put it in place, push it down. Friction will hold it in place, but I never trust friction entirely. I do however trust a nice bit of masking tape. There we are. And that'll just take a few hours to dry. Alright, the glue has dried, which means now it's time for us to get the struts together. As I said, this will be a very quick process. I've removed the binding from the nacelle side of the junction to allow the wires to move freely, and chances are I'll remove this one once we've got a bit more work done further down the line. But it's important that these wires fit through that hole we carved earlier so that it can have just enough play that we can get it into the slot without pulling too much on the wires. Be careful not to get any glue on the actual wires. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I get a nice thin even coating along the seams. Especially on a large flat area like this one, and indeed along here as well. Now, in a moment of truth, it's important to get those wires in position, and with some masking tape, nice and tight, clamp it shut. Alright, that's had some time to dry, so let's go ahead and peel off the masking tape. Struts and nacelles together at last, which means that the final step for this video is attaching it all together. I'm going to run bead around the inside lip rather than on the strut, which should mean that I get a good connection. As it's an internal facing and quite importantly structure, I'm going to be liberal with the glue. Make sure that cable sits on the inside. Push it in place. Take this comically large piece of masking tape, and without making it too tense, just enough to ensure that it's being pushed in place. And there we are. We're one step closer. Make sure they're straight. And we'll leave those to dry. And there we go. At long last, we have our two nacelles and struts lit up. I was tempted to go into the main body next, but I think in the next video what we'll do is we'll start dealing with the gaps and edges around the nacelles, as they'll be easier to work with whilst they're still free floating. But that'll do it for this episode. Next time, as I said, we'll be dealing with them cracks. So until then, I'm Raven, and that's all from the desk.